Hello, Mr. Westrick here, and it's time for another lesson. And this is one of our lessons on math terminology, because as you get into the third, fourth, fifth, and upper grades, you're going to have more and more vocabulary words in math, and it's important to know what they mean and how they are used in math. And the word we're going to talk about today is inverse. You will hear a lot of statements like the inverse of multiplication is division, or addition, the inverse of addition is subtraction. So let's understand exactly what inverse is, and to begin doing that, you guessed it, let's go to the board. Okay, now inverse might seem like a pretty big word, but you know, when you were in probably first or second grade, you heard another big word that sounded pretty big, and that was opposite. And that might have seemed like a very hard word. But now I'm sure it's easy for most all of you to know what opposite means. And we have an example of that below. We know that the opposite of hot is cold. If something is not burning hot, the opposite of something being burning hot would be icy cold. Or another example, we don't have it on the board, but the opposite of up would be down. And the opposite of sad would be, you got it, it would be happy. Well, in the math world, instead of using the word opposite, we use the word inverse. And so we're going to use the word inverse to see what the opposite is of multiplication. What is the opposite of addition? Or what is the opposite of subtraction? Or the opposite of division? Well, we're going to take a look at that right now. So now that we have determined that inverse means opposite, let's see more clearly how this relates to addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And to do that, let's go to the board. And we found that inverse means opposite. And so we said that addition is the inverse of subtraction because addition is the opposite of subtraction. If you are not adding pennies in your hands, you're taking them away. And multiplication is the opposite or the inverse of division. If you're not multiplying, then the opposite of multiplication is division. And opposite means inverse, or inverse means the opposite. So again, the inverse or the opposite of addition is subtraction, and the inverse or the opposite of multiplication is division. But now let's put some numbers on the board and see how that works in practical usage when we work with numbers. Okay, now we have a set of 3 numbers, and they will illustrate to us how we can use the inverse. So to do that, let's go to the board. Okay, we have a triangle here, and you notice our 3 numbers. We have 12, 3, and 4. And we will see how these numbers are what we call fact families because they are related to one another, and we can see that by how we use the inverse. We can use multiplication first, and we can see how 4 times 3 equals 12. And 12, but the inverse would be 12 divided by 3 equals 4. So, the opposite or the inverse of 4 times 3 equals 12 is 12 divided by 3 equals 4. Or, we can start with the 12 and we can start with division and say 12 divided by 4 equals 3. And the opposite of that, or the inverse, is 3 times 4 equals 12. So we can see how they are related. So if you needed to find a missing number of a fact family, you could say, you cover up your 3, you would go 12 divided by 4 equals what is the missing number? It would be 3, because we know the same three numbers are in our fact family. 12, 4, and 3. 3 times 4 equals 12. 12 divided by 4 equals 3. We can go down the other side of the triangle. 12 divided by 3 equals 4. And 4 times 3 equals 12. So now let's look at another set of three numbers to continue this illustration. Okay, let's check our second set of numbers that are fact families. So to do that, let's go to the board. And again, these three numbers are fact families because they are related to each other, because we find, like in multiplication, 2 times 9 equals 18. But the inverse of that, the opposite, is 18 divided by 9 equals 2. Notice we can't put another number there in the fact family. We have to have the same three numbers, because 18 divided by 10 doesn't equal 2, or 2 times 10 doesn't equal 18. They all have to be the same three numbers. It's only 2 times 9 that equals 18. So the 9 always has to go with the 2 to equal 18. We can do it the other way. 9 times 2 equals 18. And the opposite of that is the inverse, where we could say 18 divided by 9 equals 2. Or we could say 2 times 9 equals 18. And the inverse, or the opposite of that, would be 18 divided by 2 equals 9. So we can see how they are a family. They're related to each other. The 2 and the 9, when you multiply them, equal 18. And if you multiply the 18 divided by 2, you'll get the 9. Or if you'll divide 18 divided by 9, you'll get the 2. And that is the inverse. We see the inverse relationship of multiplication and division for these three numbers and their fact families. But let's look at one more example. Okay, now let's take a look at our final three numbers and see how they are part of a fact family by using the inverse relationships. So let's, one more time now, go to the board. The three numbers we have are 21, 7, and 3. And for those of you who have memorized your multiplication facts, you know that 7 times 3 equals 21. And that's how they are related, because since 7 times 3 equals 21, the inverse, or the opposite, would be 21 divided by 3 equals 7. So we can see how these three numbers are all related. We can go down the other side of the triangle and it will work. 21 divided by 7 is 3, equals 3. Or we can do the inverse relationship of division, because the opposite of division is multiplication, and we can say 3 times 7 equals 21. So we can see that these three numbers are related. If you divide these two numbers, 21 and 7, you get 3, and then if you do the opposite, or the inverse, you will know that 3 times 7 equals 21. So let's review what we have learned in this lesson. We have learned a very important vocabulary word for mathematics, and that is inverse. And we have found that the easiest way to define inverse is to think that it means opposite. And we know that the opposite of multiplication is division. So the inverse relationship of multiplication is division, and the inverse relationship between addition is subtraction. And so that concludes our lesson on inverse relationships.